So the question is it that we've suffered more fraud, or is it that we've become better at detecting it and more open in reporting it? We would all wish that it's the latter, but probably it's a combination of both. Then in terms of what type of fraud have you suffered? When we ask that question to the financial services sector, for the first time, the most prevalent form of crime was fraud committed by the consumer. So basically, fraud that has been committed either by your customers or somebody purporting to be your customer. So when you talk of things like SIM swaps, for instance, that's somebody purporting to be your customer, then defrauding either you or your clients. Or if it's credit, when you have a case like the case that was in the media recently, where you have a borrower that uses the same security with 3 different banks, again, it's your customer. So as you're working hard to get more and more customers, then those customers, or at least some of them, are working even harder to defraud you or their fellow customers. So prevalence rate for fraud committed by the consumer was at 65%. And that's quite consistent with the other industries. Overall, it was second, with asset misappropriation as the most common. But for the financial services sector, fraud committed by the consumer was the most prevalent, followed by cybercrime. Again, across all industries, cybercrime was actually number 7. So for the other industries, they worry more about asset misappropriation, procurement fraud, business misconduct. But in the first sector, after fraud by the consumer, then cybercrime is a close second. And also, 3 out of 5 respondents said that in the next 2 years, they expect that cybercrime will be their most disruptive type of fraud. So in terms of looking forward, we must keep cybercrime in mind. In terms of how bad the fraud is, in terms of the impact on the bottom line, about 20% of the respondents in the first sector said that they lost more than $1 million to their most disruptive economic crime. So this is not what they lost overall, but to their most disruptive crime. Actually, 3%, and here I'm talking Kenya, lost more than 500 million shillings. So when you're hit by fraud, you can be hit really hard. And more than 40% then lost more than more than 10 million shillings. So the situation is bad, clearly. Now the question is, what do we do about it? But I guess before we try and answer that question, is to ask, what does the fintech revolution portend in terms of fraud? So what is it that is changing, and how will these changes affect our ability to either detect or prevent fraud, or even investigate it when it happens? So the first, as we discussed this, with our team at PwC, the first thing we thought about is around the timelines. So we are moving from a traditional lender, and here I will speak specifically to lenders, where 10 years ago, if I wanted to borrow money from a bank and I was offering my land as security, it would probably have taken 2 weeks before you have the loan approved. And once it's approved, to have the money disbursed, again, would also have been a process. And where you have these long timelines, then you have an opportunity to actually verify the transaction and carry out checks. But now we are moving to a situation where if I'm getting a loan on my mobile phone, it's probably because I'm in an emergency. And the expectation is that I will have that money within minutes. Or even if I'm making a payment, then I'm probably at a petrol station, I need to pay for my petrol. So, I mean, a day or 2 days, you can't ask for a day as the lender to verify who I am. The second point is around the reduced contact between the borrower and the lender. So again, if I use the example of where I would have wanted to borrow money 10 years ago with land as my security, the bank would probably have expected to see me, and actually if it's land, if I'm married, my spouse as well. So everybody would have had a chance to verify that I am who I say I am. But I mean, in the fintech era, you'll probably never see almost all of your customers in person. So you'll have to identify who you are dealing with without actually having any face time. And you also lose the opportunity, for instance, to train your tellers. Say if you take the bank scenario, you could train your teller to look at somebody who is sweating, for instance, and then decide they're not going to lend to them. But when you get a request on your mobile phone, then you don't have that opportunity. The second thing is around, and if I'm going too fast, let me know. Okay. The next thing is about quicker, easier access to an ever-growing data or data set. So again, in the traditional bank scenario, probably the only information that a bank would have about me is about my latest utility bill, so they get to know where it is that I live, or they assume that is where I live, maybe my pay slip, and probably my other biodata in terms of date and birth. But with fintechs, in addition to that information, or maybe as an alternative to that information, you have even much more data. You know where it is that I sleep, as opposed to where it is that I pay my utility bills. You know the route I take home. You know where it is that I work, who it is that I speak to, how many times I call my mother. So the more data you have, the more an incentive it is for fraudsters to try and get that data from you. But equally, the more destructive a leak would be. So you can imagine if that information was to get to the wrong hands. So data then becomes a priority. Then there's the increased transactions frequency. So that's different from the timelines. So the timelines means you need to complete the transaction in a very short period of time. The frequency means you are probably issuing thousands of loans within, say, a day. Again, if we go back a number of years back, if, say, I was a microfinance that is lending to tea farmers or dairy farmers, we'll probably have 10 loan requests in a day. And everyone from the branch manager to the tellers will get a chance to interact with whoever is borrowing, and you have time because you only have 10. But probably now in 10 seconds, you'll probably have 100 if you are doing mobile lending. And since from banks to micro lenders, everybody's moving towards mobile lending, then you must come up with a way where, despite the higher frequency, you're still able to verify the transactions and pick out the fraudulent ones. The other bit is around the mushrooming number of players, channels, and products. So I can feel for the likes of the central bank. So a few years ago, you have 40 banks. So those are the people who lend. They are the people you regulate. Today, probably the number you had today morning will be different from the number you'll have by the end of the day. And they'll all be different. So even starting with the traditional banks, the products and the channels have increased. So everybody's moving towards agency banking, mobile banking. So in terms of products, in terms of channels, you don't just have to think about checks, you also have to think about your mobile money platforms, and we don't know which other channel will come up in the next few years or so. Think about all these other different players and have them in mind as you're designing ways to combat the fraud. So to quote Achebe, it's a while since I've had a chance to use the literature. What did we call it? Anyway, if we continue doing things the same way we've been doing them, then, as Achebe said, the center will no longer hold and things will fall apart. So the question is then, what do we do to be able to combat fraud? And a few things to sort of think of. So the first is around what to do as the individual lender or player within the lending space. So there's a question around doing what you'd call proactive fraud management. So there you ask, we usually say you have 3 lines of defense against fraud. You have the first line, which is the people who actually transact on a day-to-day basis. So you must review your people, your data, your systems, your technology, and be sure that they're sort of able to detect fraud. They know what fraud is to begin with. They're able to detect it, and if they detect it, then they know what to do about it. Then you have the second line of defense, where you are saying maybe you have a forensics team or a security team, whatever it is that you call it, but you have a team that specializes in detecting and combating fraud. So do they know what they are doing? Do you have enough people? Do you have enough systems? Are you keeping at pace with the developments in the sector? The second bit is around moving from, so one is having a suspicious transaction monitoring system. So many people, especially banks, will have one. They'll have a system that can detect a transaction and flag it as suspicious, but not everybody will have. So the first thing is to have it. The second thing is probably to move from the rule-based systems where you tell it, if John is sending money to Nigeria or Bulgaria, flag that transaction, to one that can, using AI, using predictive data analytics, tell that, yeah, John actually has a wife in Nigeria, so it's normal for him to send money to Nigeria. But it's abnormal for him to send a request to transfer money from the Kamiti area, because he generally works within Westlands. So you need to have those systems and moving more towards behavior as opposed to rule-based. So that's at individual entity level. Then there are all these, as I said, you have more players. So if you are a lender, for instance, you have to work with very many different vendors. So there is a question of how do you get comfort that the vendors that you are dealing with are the right people and they have the right systems in place. So for instance, are they vetting their staff, or do you have fraudsters that move from one of your vendors to the other? Because by virtue of how you interact with your vendors, you must give them access. So if there are people that you can't trust, then they are the people who are more likely to leave a backdoor that then a fraudster will use to access your system. So as an industry, is it possible, for instance, to come up with a standard that says for anybody to be a vendor within this industry, then they need to meet these certain minimum criteria? Or also, is it possible, for instance, to have an audit that is done industry-wide, and then you have vendors who are accredited? So again, food for thought. The third one, and one which I think is very relevant to this forum, is around fraud information sharing. So, I mean, we talk about credit information sharing, and we've seen its benefits. The benefits of sharing information and insights around fraud can be just as good, if not better. And also can't say better in this forum, but they can be just as good. So we have, for instance, countries like the UK, where they actually have a financial intelligence and insight sharing system. And they actually report that by sharing that information, they've been able to stop, of every 10 pounds of attempted fraud, they've been able to stop 6 pounds and 40 pence. So I don't know how they measured it, but considering they're in the fraud business, I would hope they are not fraudulent. But you can imagine that's a 64% reduction in successful fraud. So it's an idea that we believe its time has come. The question is, what do you need to have in place to actualize it in terms of the laws? So we have the data protection bill. So we are working with the likes of KBA to actually have a clause that would allow such sharing of information. The EU GDPR, as an example, for instance, allows for such sharing. That's why the UK, for instance, is able to do it. So once you have the laws in place, then you need the structures and regulations. But it's an idea that we believe needs to be thought about and acted upon. So I'll stop there. I hope I'm still within my time.